The story of this abandoned town in Scotland tells us how the Highland clearances, capitalism and the slave trade were linked together. This is Aronin. Nestled in the hills of Knapdale and Argyll, this abandoned township was once a thriving community of families, but thanks to the Highland clearances, it now lies empty. Now, these lands historically belonged to the Campbell clan, but they were eventually sold to Neil Malcolm XII of Baltalic. Now, despite being portrayed as a paternalistic landlord in Scotland, Neil Malcolm XII didn't extend the same courtesy to those on his Jamaican plantations. In fact, not only was he one of the largest scale slave owners in all of Jamaica, but when the slave trade was eventually abolished in the British colonies in 1838, his family received around £4.8 million in today's money as compensation for the loss of 2,181 slaves. Those who were enslaved on his plantations received nothing. After his death in 1837, his son Neil Malcolm XIII took charge of his lands here in Scotland and decided to introduce here the same managerial system that his father had used to build enormous wealth in Jamaica. He also learned that sheep farming was now wildly more profitable than having tenant farmers and hatched a plan to have them removed. Waiting until after his tenants had planted their crops in the spring of 1848, Neil Malcolm XIII ordered his tenants to flit and remove themselves, which is an old Scottish word that means move house essentially. Now, not wanting to lose the precious crops that they had just planted, the community ignored the landowner's request, and a few months later in June, the sheriff officers, estate factor and a team of around 25 men came to physically remove them. But again, they were ignored. 1 month later, they returned, not only to remove the tenants, but their cattle and all of the furniture from their homes. By now, the resistance had grown fiercer, with local communities like Kilmorey Obe joining the fight, and the police and their backup were met with up to 100 people armed with sticks and stones. They were then chased all the way back to Loch Gilphead, with the resistance growing to over 200 people on the way. The police did manage to capture a few of the ringleaders, however, the mob was so big that they had to be released back into the community, and it was at this point that the Crown Office was contacted for military assistance. The requests, however, were refused, and a month later, thanks to Gaelic interpreters, the community fell victim to big sheep and was finally cleared. It's popular in some quarters of Scotland to paint the Highland clearances as a Scotland v England issue, but the reality is that many of the clearances were carried out by the Scottish elite, who were more than willing participants in the Highland clearances, capitalism and the slave trade.